The courthouse elevator is supposed to be the safest place in the building. For state's witness, Dominic Farrell, it became a trap. A man carrying a sealed legal courier envelope and a quiet, practiced smile stepped off on the 14th floor of the Harmon County Courthouse at 7:52 in the morning. He had a visitor's badge, a pressed gray suit, and a story for anyone who asked. He didn't have an appointment. He didn't need one. He expected an empty hallway, a side stairwell, and 11 minutes to finish what the Kellerman Crime Syndicate had paid him $400,000 to do. He didn't account for the court clerk at the end of the hall. At 7:52 a.m., the administrative corridor of the Harmon County Courthouse existed in the particular silence that belongs only to government buildings before the public arrives. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly. The carpet, a muted burgundy that absorbed sound like a sponge, muffled every footstep. The air smelled of old coffee and printer toner, and the faint industrial cleaner that the overnight janitors used on the marble floors downstairs. Jess Ardmore was at her desk before anyone else on the floor. She was always at her desk before anyone else. At 31, she had been a senior court clerk in the criminal division for 4 years. She was the kind of person people overlooked at parties. Medium height, brown hair pulled back in a low bun, a cardigan that was a size too large. She had the quiet, slightly apologetic manner of someone perpetually worried about taking up too much space. Her supervisor, a stout man named Gerald Price, had once described her in a performance review as reliable and unobtrusive. He meant it as a compliment. Jess had read it and smiled and said nothing, which was something she had become very good at. What Gerald Price did not know, because it was not his business, and because Jess had spent considerable effort ensuring no one in this building knew, was that before she became a court clerk, Jess Ardmore had spent 7 years as a field intelligence analyst with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Before that, she had done 2 tours as a military police investigator in Kandahar. She had spent the better part of her 20s in places where reading a person wrong got you killed. She had retired from that life, quietly, deliberately, after an operation in Tbilisi that she was still not permitted to discuss. She had taken the clerk position because she wanted silence. She had taken the cardigan because she wanted invisibility. This morning, her attention was fixed on the Kellerman file. Dominic Farrell was 44 years old, a mid-level logistics manager who had spent 8 years moving untraceable cash, weapons, and influence for the Kellerman organization without fully understanding the scope of what he was facilitating. 3 months ago, he had opened the wrong email on a work server and seen a wire transfer summary that explained exactly where 3 missing federal informants had gone. He had called a federal tip line from a gas station payphone that same night. Tomorrow morning, Farrell was scheduled to testify before a sealed grand jury proceeding in courtroom 9, 2 floors below. His testimony would name 2 city council members, a sitting county judge, and the deputy commissioner of the city's Port Authority. The Kellerman organization had survived federal scrutiny for 11 years by making witnesses disappear, not violently, as a rule. Quietly, accidents, medical events, the occasional suicide with a note that was just plausible enough. Farrell was currently in a secured holding room on the 12th floor, with 2 deputy marshals from the Witness Protection Detail, a panic button wired to the building's security command center, and a breakfast tray he hadn't touched. He was also, technically, the reason Jess was already at her desk at 7:52 in the morning. She had been tasked with managing the sealed document transfer, the grand jury subpoenas, and the corroborating financial records that would accompany Farrell's testimony. The files were classified at the state level. They lived in a locked drawer in her desk until they were needed. She was reviewing the chain of custody form when the elevator at the far end of the hall opened. Jess did not look up immediately. That was deliberate. People who look up at every sound telegraph awareness, and awareness is something she had learned to conceal. Instead, she let her peripheral vision do the work. The man who stepped off the elevator was tall, unhurried, gray suit. Visitor's badge clipped to the breast pocket, a sealed courier envelope tucked under one arm, the kind of padded manila that lawyers and process servers used constantly in this building. He moved with the measured, confident stride of someone who belonged wherever he was. Not because he was nervous, but because he had practiced being not nervous. Jess watched him for 4 seconds. His shoes were wrong. She noticed that first. Polished black cap toes. The kind that looked like dress shoes until you looked at the sole, which was thick, non-slip, and entirely silent on the carpet in a way that dress shoe leather did not account for. Combat sole composites. She'd worn the same type overseas, in a different color. His eyes were wrong, too. He glanced once at the ceiling, at the camera placement, and then stopped glancing at the ceiling. A lawyer checking the ceiling would do it out of habit or boredom. This man had done it to catalog and dismiss. He was not carrying the envelope the way a courier carried an envelope. He was carrying it the way a person carrying something else entirely holds a prop. Jess looked back down at her chain of custody form. "Hannah," she said quietly without raising her voice, to the paralegal intern 2 desks over who was refilling a stapler. "Can you run down to records and pull the Kellerman exhibit log? 3rd floor, East Annex. Take the stairs." "Elevator's been slow this morning." Hannah blinked. "Didn't someone just come up the elevator?" "Slow on the way down," Jess said. "Take the stairs." Hannah left. Jess kept her eyes on the form. The man in the gray suit was 30 feet away now, moving toward the secure wing where the marshal's holding suite was located. Halfway down the hall, he would pass the duty officer's window. If the duty officer was at his post, the man would need a secondary credential. If the duty officer had stepped away, and Jess had noticed 20 minutes ago that Deputy Brixton had left his window to get coffee, the man would have a clear path. She did not reach for her phone. A call to security would create noise, and noise would push a cornered man toward a decision point too fast. Instead, Jess stood, tucked the chain of custody folder under her arm like she was delivering something routine, and walked down the hall. "Excuse me," she called it out in the exact tone of a busy administrator flagging down a person who had taken a wrong turn. Faintly apologetic, efficient, 0 alarm. "Sir, this wing requires a secondary badge scan." The reader's back by the elevator. The man in the gray suit turned. He had a pleasant face, the kind of face designed to reassure. He smiled easily. "I'm here to drop a certified delivery for the Kellerman proceeding. Judge Whitmore's chambers." He held up the envelope. "I've already cleared the lobby." "Lobby clearance doesn't cover the secure administrative wing," Jess said, walking toward him at a pace that was helpful and non-threatening, and closed the distance by 12 feet before he could comfortably redirect her. "I can take the delivery. What firm?" He hesitated. Not long, a quarter of a second, the kind of pause that polygraph operators lived for, but enough. "Halstead and Crane." Jess nodded, extending her hand for the envelope. "I'll sign for it. They know me." He didn't hand it over. That was the tell she had been waiting for. A legitimate courier hands over the envelope. That is the entire point of being a courier. The refusal to release it meant the envelope was not the delivery. It was the cover. "Actually," he said, his voice dropping just slightly below casual, "I need a direct signature from Chambers." "Protocol." "Of course," Jess smiled. "Follow me. I'll take you through." She turned as if to lead him toward a door that did not, in fact, go to Chambers. It went to the supply annex. She had worked in this building for 4 years, and she knew every door on this floor, and she also knew that the supply annex had a fire door with a push bar that triggered the building's secondary alarm panel when opened without a code. She had 4 steps before he figured it out. She got 3. The grip on her arm came fast and hard, practiced, his thumb finding the pressure point above her elbow with the efficiency of someone trained to control without bruising. She felt the muzzle of something small and suppressed press against the back of her cardigan. "Don't." His voice was still calm, still that pleasant, corporate register. "I just need 5 minutes on the 12th floor. You're going to walk me to the stairwell, and we're going to have a nice quiet morning. Nobody gets hurt." "You're right," Jess said. She dropped the folder. It was not an accident. In the half-second that his eyes tracked the falling papers. An involuntary response, impossible to fully suppress. She stepped into him rather than away, pivoting on her left foot, her right elbow driving back and up into the soft tissue just below his ribs. The suppressed pistol discharged into the carpet. A sound like a hardback book dropped flat. The shot went wide, burying itself in the baseboard. She had his gun hand now, wrist hyperextended, his index finger still inside the trigger guard at an angle that transferred the mechanical disadvantage entirely to her. She walked him sideways into the wall, his forehead making abrupt contact with the drywall, and drove her knee into the back of his, buckling the joint. He went down on one knee. She stripped the weapon with the rotation she had drilled in a windowless room in Fort Meade in 2017 and stepped back. He was big, and he recovered fast. He came up off the wall and went for the envelope. Not to protect it, she realized, but because there was something inside it that wasn't paper. She put herself between him and the stairwell door and raised the weapon. "Hands," Jess said. He stopped. She could hear her own pulse. Not racing, elevated, controlled, the way it had been in Kandahar, in Tbilisi, in a car in the parking garage of a hotel in Minsk that she was definitely not permitted to discuss. The cardigan was slipping off one shoulder. She did not adjust it. "Who hired you?" she said. "Lady," he said, his voice finally losing its pleasantness, replaced by something flat and professional. "You want to think very carefully about what you're doing." "I've been thinking carefully since the elevator opened," Jess said. "Hands. Lace your fingers behind your head. Turn around and walk toward the window at the end of the hall." He assessed her. She knew what he was calculating. Female, small frame, civilian building, shaking hands, except her hands were not shaking, and he saw that, and the calculation shifted. He laced his fingers. He turned. "On the floor," Jess said, once he reached the window. "Knees first, arms out." He complied with the particular careful economy of a man deciding this was not the moment, but reserving the right to revisit that decision. Jess kept the weapon on him and used her right heel to kick the folder she had dropped earlier across the floor. The chain of custody forms skidded across the carpet and disappeared under a desk. She didn't need it. She needed the panic button on her keychain, which she pressed 3 times in rapid succession. The building security code for active threat, not alarm, not accident, but a person requesting immediate response. She heard the door at the end of the corridor bang open. Heavy footsteps. Radio traffic bleeding through into the hallway. Deputy Brixton came around the corner with his hand on his holster and coffee still in his other hand, which he seemed to realize was a problem because he put it down on the nearest desk without looking at it. "What the?" Brixton stared at the man on the floor, then at Jess, then at the suppressed pistol in Jess's hand with the competent two-handed grip that did not belong to a court clerk. "Ardmore? Call down to 12, Jess said. "Tell the marshals to do a full sweep of their floor." This one didn't come alone. Brixton stared at her. "Brixton." Her voice did not rise. It simply settled the way a hand settles on a table. "Now." He grabbed his radio. She was right about the second man. 40 seconds later, the marshal's detail on the 12th floor found a building maintenance contractor in a gray uniform who had been in the utility closet adjacent to the holding room for the past 23 minutes. He had 2 zip ties, a syringe of midazolam, and a laminated maintenance work order that would not have survived a 30-second phone call to the facilities department. He was sitting on the floor with his hands behind his head by the time the 3rd radio call came through, because Deputy Marshal Cecile Orano had 17 years on the job and had smelled the maintenance contractor play before, and she moved faster than anyone on her team liked to admit. The man in the gray suit did not say an asufter word. He sat on the carpet with his fingers laced and his expression the careful neutral of someone running through contingency plans that were not apparently panning out. 2 building security officers arrived within 4 minutes and a federal marshal 30 seconds after that. And by the time the lead investigator from the FBI's Organized Crime Division pushed through the stairwell door at 8:21 a.m., the man in the gray suit was in handcuffs, and the hallway looked almost ordinary again, except for the small dark scorch mark on the baseboard from the suppressed round. The lead investigator was a lean woman named Special Agent Dorinda Vance, who had worked Kellerman for 3 years and whose expression when she looked at the courier envelope, slit open by forensics to reveal a compact signal jammer that would have knocked out the holding room's panic button and the marshal's radio channel simultaneously, was the look of a person who had suspected something like this but had hoped to be wrong. She looked at Jess. "You're the clerk who made the stop?" "Jess Ardmore," Senior Clerk, Criminal Division. Jess had retrieved her cardigan from the floor and was putting it back on. He came up on the elevator at 7:52. His shoes were wrong. Agent Vance looked at the shoes, which were still on the man in handcuffs. Then she looked at Jess for a long moment with the expression of someone recalculating a column of numbers and arriving at a different total than they expected. "You took his weapon. He had it against my back," Jess said. It seemed like a reasonable response. "You have any kind of training, Ms. Ardmore? Self-defense? Prior law enforcement?" "I worked overseas for a while," Jess said. "Before this." Vance waited. "Government work," Jess said, which was technically accurate, and also the most she was prepared to say in a hallway with 3 security officers and a man in handcuffs who was actively listening. It was a long time ago. Vance studied her for another moment, then looked back at the man on the floor. "We've had this building under supplemental surveillance for 6 weeks, she said. "We had the lobby covered, the parking structure, the main stairwells." A pause. "Nobody was watching the 14th floor administrative corridor at 7 in the morning because we assessed it as low risk." "A lot of people assess administrative corridors as low risk," Jess said. "Yeah." Vance's voice was dry. "That's useful to know." Downstairs, on the 12th floor, Dominic Farrell had been moved to the secondary holding room and was eating a breakfast sandwich a marshal had brought him from the vending machine on 11. He didn't know what had happened on the floor above him. He didn't know that a signal jammer had been 40 minutes away from cutting his panic button. He didn't know that the reason he would walk into courtroom 9 tomorrow morning and deliver the testimony that would unravel 11 years of the Kellerman organization's careful work was, in no small part, because a court clerk in a too large cardigan had noticed a pair of shoes. The investigation that followed pulled 3 more threads from the Kellerman organization in the space of 2 weeks. The man in the gray suit, whose name turned out to be Eric DeHill, with a professional history that spanned 4 continents and 8 years of contract work for a management consulting firm that did not, on close inspection, appear to manage or consult anything, gave up nothing in initial questioning, but was held on federal charges that did not require his cooperation to proceed. The maintenance contractor gave up considerably more, as people who had not fully committed to the professional discipline of silence tended to do when facing 15 years. Deputy Brixton, when asked in a subsequent debrief why he had followed Jess Ardmore's instruction without verification, thought about it for a moment and said, "She didn't sound like someone who was guessing." That, Jess thought when she heard about it, was probably the most accurate thing anyone in this building had ever said about her. She was back at her desk by 9:15. The chain of custody form had been recovered from under the desk, slightly wrinkled, and she smoothed it out and completed it and placed it in the locked drawer with the Kellerman files. She made a fresh cup of coffee. She pulled up the filing queue for the afternoon docket. Gerald Price stopped by her desk at 9:30, red-faced and still processing what the building security chief had described to him in terms he had found difficult to follow. "Jess," he said, "are you all right? I heard there was an incident." "I'm fine," Jess said. "Someone took a wrong turn. They're saying you." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the hallway. "That you. There was a disturbance," Jess said. "Security handled it." Gerald Price looked at her for a long moment in the way people look at things they have seen every day for years and are only now actually seeing. Then he nodded, slowly, and went back to his office. Jess turned back to her screen. The filing queue had 43 items. She started at the top. Some courthouses are places where justice gets decided. In the hallways and the holding rooms and the quiet administrative corridors that nobody monitors at 7 in the morning, it sometimes has to be defended first. Jess Ardmore had spent years doing that work in places most people had never heard of, for reasons she was not permitted to explain. She had come back to do it here, in a too large cardigan, at a desk that nobody noticed, on a floor that nobody watched. She preferred it that way.